Hello, I am the Understudy, and this is the channel where we discuss everything musical theater related. Today we are reading Barron's AP Music Theory 3rd edition by Nancy Fuller-Scoggin, BME. This is a long and extensive book, and I'm working my way through it to learn more, and these videos are a way for me to organize my journey, but I am very happy that you're here with me. Before we start, if you have any questions throughout, type them in the comments, and I'll see what I can do to answer them. This is part 5, Harmonic Organization 1, Intervals, Triads, and 7th Chords. Let's get started. Let's start with some vocabulary. A lot of vocabulary for this one. We have counterpoint, harmony, intervals, including compound interval, consonant interval, diatonic interval, dissonant interval, enharmonic interval, half step, harmonic interval, inversions of intervals, interval qualities such as perfect P, major M, minor, a small capital letter M, augmented A or a plus, diminished, dim or a little circle, double augmented, doubly diminished. We have melodic interval, numeric or interval quantity, simple interval, tritone, and whole step. We also have triads, augmented, A or plus, diminished, dim or a little circle, major, capital M, minor, small m, inversion of triads, meaning root position, first inversion, second inversion. We also have 7th chords, major, major, with MM, major, minor, 7th, MM, M with a small m, and then a dominant 7th chord. Or we have a minor 7th, we have diminished minor, half diminished 7th, we have diminished diminished, fully diminished 7th, and we also have inversions of 7th chords, which are root position, first inversion, second inversion, and third inversion, and then we have unison. Okay. Harmony refers to the way notes are simultaneously sounded, creating a vertical element to music. A single melody or linear voice added to another line of music is called a counterpoint. This combination of voices, each significant by itself, creates this note against note. It is unique to music to be able to comprehend things being said at the same time. While a composer may weave together 2 or 3 or more melodies linear, he also recognizes, or she, sexist, anyways, sorry, also recognizes what combining those melodies creates harmonically vertical. In the next 3 chapters, we learn how chords are constructed and how they follow each other, progression, through a musical composition. As a melody progresses, it gives clues for harmonizing a multitude of convincing ways. We'll begin by putting notes together, 2 at a time. Intervals. The ability to identify intervals orally and visually is a critical building block of AP music theory. It is based on recognition of scales and key signatures. Interval knowledge leads to chords, and chord knowledge leads to understanding of harmonic function. Intervals will aid you in voice leading, composition, and transposition, as well as sight singing and dictation. An interval is the distance between 2 pitches. Intervals are melodic sounding one after another as in a melody, or harmonic, 2 pitches sounding at the same time. We describe each interval size by its quantity, size, and quality. Quantity is expressed by a number and is determined simply by counting the distance between one letter name and the next letter name. Remember, always count the bottom as 1. So from a line to a line, or a space to a space, there's always an odd number, and from a line to a space, there's always an even number. Here we have a good example at the top here. We have a line to a space. This would mean that it's a second. Line to a line is the first one, it's just 1. Line to line, 3. Line to space, 4. Line to 5, 5. Line to line, 5. Line to space, 6. Line to line, 7. And line to space, 8. Here we have it constructed with actual notes. So identifying interval quality. Tip. In this guide, all perfect intervals will be labeled using the uppercase P, and major intervals will be labeled using the uppercase M. All minor intervals which we see here, will be labeled with a lowercase m. Sometimes when handwriting, there's also a little line above the m just to differentiate. All intervals built from the tonic up to notes within a major scale are either major or perfect. This is in a major scale. The perfect interval are unison, sometimes called prime. This first one here. P1. Then we have the perfect fourth, the perfect fifth, and the perfect eighth or octave. Therefore, the major intervals are major second, you can see them on the top here, major third, major sixth, and major seventh. Unisons, fourths, fifths, and octaves can never be major or minor, and seconds, thirds, sixths, and sevenths are never perfect. Intervals built from the tonic to notes within the natural minor include major, minor, and perfect. A minor interval is 1/2 step smaller than a major. Here we can see this note being lowered a half step from A to A flat. Same thing with these notes if you compare them there. So we have the minors here and the majors here. A minor interval is 1/2 step smaller than a major. So here we have the intervals in the F major and F natural minor. So let's look over them side by side. I've already put them here for you. Notice that perfect intervals are the same in major or minor. The intervals that are different are the third, the sixth, and the seventh. As discussed in chapter 3, scale degrees 3, 6, and 7 give major or minor their characteristic sound. The intervals from 1 to 3 and 1 to 6 and 1 to 7 are major in major tonality and minor in minor tonality. I'm also going to play you a little sample of what this sounds like. So here we have F, and if we wanted to make it a perfect first or a perfect unison prime, here we have that. If we wanted to do a major second, a minor third in minor, a major third, a perfect fourth, a perfect fifth, a major sixth. I forgot the minor sixth, let's do that. Then we have a minor seventh, a major seventh, and then we have an octave. Let's see. An interval is a half step smaller than a perfect minor or diminished. Yeah, so there's also something called diminished and augmented. And an interval that is 1/2 step smaller than a perfect, here we have a perfect, or a half step smaller than a minor is called a diminished. An interval that is 1 step larger than major or perfect is called an augmented. For augmented, we use a or a plus sign. For major, we use large M, minor, small m. Diminished, we use dim or a circle. And for perfect, we use P. Here are some major and perfect intervals transformed into diminished and augmented intervals. Notice what happens when the accidental is on the bottom note. So here we have a major second, and this is an augmented second, meaning this is a little raised. Here we have a major third, and this is an augmented third, meaning this one is lowered. Here we have a perfect fourth, and here we have an augmented fourth, meaning this one is raised, a perfect fifth, and this is a diminished fifth, meaning this one is lowered. You can see that they've just alternated between raising the top, raising the bottom, or lowering the top, or lowering the bottom. So you can see that they have used all kinds of ways here to just make it 1/2 step larger. And the A4 and the diminished 5 that we see here, you can also see that these are the same note. This is not something that occurs in regular music unless you really make the choice to have it in there. So this is actually called a tritone. I'll get to that in a second. So the most prominent diminished interval that occurs diatonically between notes within the same key or tonality is the diminished fifth that occurs between T and Fa in major and harmonic minor. This interval inverted by transferring the upper note an octave lower, it is an augmented fourth. The augmented fourth is commonly called a tritone, just as I was explaining, because it contains 3 whole steps. Let's listen to what a tritone would sound like. So if we have the G to the C sharp there, it would sound like this. Or that's also the G to the D flat, same note. Okay, T or Fa in major or harmonic minor. We can see here we have T, Fa in A flat major. We have the tritone here and the tritone here. Same thing in G minor and same thing in B flat minor. So enharmonic intervals sound the same but are spelled differently and therefore function differently. C sharp and D flat are the same pitch. However, they are not notated on the staff. The same is true for intervals. For example, F to A flat is a minor third, but F to G sharp is an augmented second. Even though A flat and G sharp sound the same, you cannot call the interval F to G sharp a minor third because its numeric quality is 2. Therefore, it has to be some kind of second. The function refers to the pull of chromatic note that it has either up or down. An A flat has a natural pull to G because flat leads downwards, where G sharp would lead upwards to A natural. We have example of harmonic intervals. And here you also have a doubly augmented interval. So when a major or perfect interval is made one step larger without changing the letter names of the pitches, it is called doubly augmented. When a minor or perfect interval is made one whole step smaller without changing the letter names of the pitches, it is called doubly diminished. These intervals will usually require the use of a double flat or a double sharp sign. Like here we have the double, otherwise these should all already be occurring into something different. Okay. We also have if-then intervals. A great way to learn to identify or spell intervals that also reinforces key signatures and scales is by thinking of the interval in the key of the bottom note. So ask yourself, if the bottom note is tonic of a major key, then the top note, diatonic, found within the notes of the scale, in the key, then is the top note diatonic in the key of the bottom note. So if the top note is in the major key of the bottom note, then it is major or perfect. If the top note is a half step lower than the diatonic note would be, then it is a diminished or a minor interval. And if the note is a half step higher, then it would be an augmented interval. We have some more if-then considerations. So if an interval is perfect, then both the top and bottom pitch is in the major key. If the same accidental is added to both the upper and lower pitch, then the interval remains the same. If an accidental is added only to the bottom pitch, then the accidental has the opposite effect than when added to the note above. So if a flat is added to a lower pitch, the interval is larger. And if a sharp is added to the lower pitch, the interval is smaller. If the lower note does not represent a standard key, then determine what the interval would be without the accidental and adjust. For example, G sharp to E, which is a minor sixth. Because G sharp is not a standard key signature, we determine that G to E is a major sixth, and because the bottom note is a sharp, it reduces the quality by 1/2 step to minor sixth. Remember that if you are spelling intervals below a given pitch, then you must still associate the top note to the major key of the bottom note. You cannot change the given note. Intervals are 1 octave or smaller in quantity are called simple intervals. Intervals that are larger than an octave are called compound intervals. The most common are the 9th, the 10th, 11th, and 12th, which correspond to an octave plus a second, third, fourth, and fifth. Compound intervals are reduced to a simple interval by subtracting 7. For example, a major 9th minus 7 reduces to a major second. To expand a simple interval to compound, add 7. For example, a minor third plus 7 becomes a minor 10th. The quality of the interval does not change when reducing or expanding. So here we have making simple intervals compound. We have a major second to a minor second to a minor 9th, major third to a major 10th, perfect 4th to perfect 11th, perfect 5th to perfect 12th. As mentioned earlier, intervals are inverted by transferring the lower note on an octave or by transferring the higher note an octave. Major intervals can invert to minor intervals. Oh wait, no, they do. So major intervals invert to minor intervals. Augmented intervals invert to diminished intervals. And perfect intervals invert to perfect. A second inverts to a 7th, a third inverts to a 6th, and a 4th inverts to a 5th. It's the rule of 9. When any simple interval is inverted, the sum of the ascending and the descending intervals must add up to 9. So here we have 4 examples of this. We have 3 plus 6, 9, 2 plus 7, 9, 4 plus 5, 9, 5 plus 4, 9. And we have the major, minor, minor, major, perfect, perfect, augmented, diminished. Okay. Strategies for difficult intervals. Let's look at a few examples and develop a strategy for identifying and building intervals that are a little more difficult. So, how would we identify this? How do we identify this? How do we identify this? There are 2 methods to identifying difficult intervals. 1, identify, invert, and identify, or 2, cover up one or both of the accidentals to determine what you know for sure, then adjust accordingly. In the first example, the quantity is 6. Use the second method to cover up the double sharp on the top pitch. What note is a major sixth diatonic in the key of F sharp major? Answer: D sharp. Therefore, since a double sharp makes the interval larger, the answer is augmented sixth, a half step larger than major. Do the same thing for example 2. By removing the flat, the interval is a P5. By adding a flat on the bottom, the interval is made larger. So F flat to C would be an augmented fifth. Or invert the interval by placing 2, or invert interval 2 by placing F flat above the C, creating a diminished fourth. The inversion of a diminished fourth is an augmented fifth. For example 3, invert the G sharp. F sharp to G sharp is a major second, so the inversion would be a minor seventh. Use the same methods for constructing intervals. To find, so here we've go through all these 3 examples, now let's go through these. To find a major seventh below the B sharp, example 4, remove the sharp and determine what pitch is a minor seventh below B natural. The answer: C sharp. Therefore, adding a sharp to the top pitch, you must also add a sharp to the lower pitch to maintain the quality of the interval. A minor seventh below B sharp is a C double sharped. In example 5, a P perfect fifth above F flat is C flat. Therefore, to create a diminished fifth, the upper note is lowered to C double flat. In example 6, invert and find a minor second above E sharp. Still not sure? Take away the sharp sign. What is a minor second above E natural? Answer: F. Therefore, by adding a sharp to both the top and bottom pitch, you maintain the same interval quality and quantity. A minor second above E sharp is F sharp. Therefore, F sharp inverted is major seventh below E sharp. Intervals are classified as either consonant, stable, or dissonant, unstable, the impression of activity or tension. Consonant intervals are the P1, P5, P8, M. Okay, I'm gonna redo that. The consonant intervals are perfect first, perfect fifth, perfect eighth, major third, major sixth, and minor sixth. Sometimes perfect fourth, depending on the context. Melodically, a perfect fourth is always a consonant. The unison, perfect first, and the octave, perfect eighth, are most stable consonants. The lack of tension in these intervals is why composers end pieces on unisons or octaves. Dissonant intervals are major second, major seventh, and minor seventh, all augmented and diminished intervals, and sometimes perfect fourth, which is generally considered a dissonance when used harmonically above the bass. In chapter 3, we saw that the scale degrees 2, 4, 6, and 7 function as active tones that tend to lead to 1, 3, and 5. The division of the scale into active and stable tones relates directly to consonants and the dissonance of intervals. A fundamental characteristic of treatment of dissonances in tonal music is the approaching and leaving of the dissonance by step. This means that the pitches in a dissonant interval, such as an augmented fourth, will move by step to a consonant interval, such as a perfect fifth or a major third. This ensures a close connection between the dissonance and the consonances around it. The tension and energy of dissonant intervals becomes a powerful force for music direction. The motion of the dissonant intervals to the constant that acts as its goal is called resolution. So here on the screen you can see two examples of resolution of a dissonance to a consonance. So we have a augmented fourth resolved to a minor sixth, or a diminished fifth resolved to a major third. Let's do some review. So notice that within any four-part composition, there's always a possibility of intervals between voices. Those intervals are between the alto and the tenor, the soprano and the tenor, the soprano and the alto, bass and soprano, bass and alto, bass and tenor. So here we have alto soprano, tenor soprano, bass alto, bass tenor. For practice, let's identify all the intervals found in this four-measure phrase and see what's revealed about intervals with a composition. Fill in the chart and circle the intervals that are considered dissonance. I will show you the answers soon. I recommend that you pause, take a piece of paper, and write down and see what you see just for your own, and then I will reveal the answer in 3, 2, here we go. Observations. These are 78 intervals in these 13 chords. The circled intervals are dissonant. Notice that the majority of these dissonances occur at the end of the phrase, and that all the dissonant intervals except one resolve to a consonant interval. For example, in chord 7, the augmented fourth resolves to a minor sixth, and the minor seventh in chord 9 resolves to a perfect fifth. In chord 12, the penultimate chord has 3 dissonant intervals, creating intensity in the music right before the end of the phrase. Also note that the dissonant intervals containing one or both of the most active scale members, Fa, G, and T, C sharp. If we isolate the most active chord, 12, we can see that the active tones resolve correctly with Fa, G resolving down to Mi, F sharp, and T, C sharp resolving upward to Do, D. Why is the perfect fourth circled in chords 4, 6, and 11, and not in other places where the perfect fourth occurs? The answer is that in common practice style, the interval of a fourth against the bass was considered dissonant. This is important to remember and is discussed in further chapters. So, let's move on. Triads. A group of, I'm going to see what I have next here. A chord is a group of pitches that forms a single harmonic idea. The use of chords is the basic foundation of harmony. A triad is a 3-note chord, built like a snowman, made up of 2 intervals stacked in thirds. The lower note of the chord is called the root. The middle note is the third because it is an interval of a third above the root, and the upper chord is called a fifth above the root. So building triads. A triad is 2 intervals, both thirds, stacked on top of each other, snowman style. The common practice period uses this type of tertian harmony built on thirds. A triad actually contains 3 separate intervals. From the root to the third is 1 interval, a third. From the third to the fifth is a second interval, another third. The 2 outside tones, the root and the fifth, also create an interval, a fifth. So how to build a triad? Build the snowman in thirds above the roots. So tertian harmony thirds will either be all lines or all spaces. As you can see here, all lines, all spaces, all spaces, all lines. Identify the quality of the lower third as major or minor. 3. Identify the quality of the fifth between the root of the triad and the fifth as perfect, diminished, or augmented. 4. Identify the chord with the pitch name letter, the root of the snowman. And 5. Identify the quality of the triad. So here we have a little box saying that if we have a quality of a major third and a perfect fifth, it is a major triad. If we have a minor third and a perfect fifth, it is a minor triad. And if we have a minor third and a diminished fifth, it is a diminished triad. And if we have a major third and an augmented fifth, it is an augmented triad. These can also be displayed just in thirds between the third and fifth of the, excluding the root we have here. Okay, This is also a visual example for you. So if you know what the major triad is, then you can easily adjust the third and the fifth to create other chord qualities. From major, raise the fifth to create an augmented triad. From major, lower the third to create a minor triad. From major, lower the third and the fifth to create a diminished triad, or lower only the fifth from the minor triad. The key to this method is knowing what a major triad is. We will see more. This is actually, I think, is a thing from the last page. So here we have an E major chord. We can raise the fifth and we have an E augmented. We can lower the third and we have an E minor, or we can lower the third and the fifth to have an E diminished. Same thing with all of these. This is how we change chords to be different. So recognizing triads. Once you're comfortable with building triads in all qualities, it's time to look at real music and compare chords in context. Much of the music we study in AP music theory has 4 parts or voices. When we have 4 parts and only 3 chord members, then one note of the chord has to be doubled, usually the root. When you're analyzing music for chord quality, the first thing that has to be determined is the root of the chord. Chords are not always written to be nice, neat, in order. The lowest sounding note is not always the root. So, stack your snowman in thirds. Find the root and determine the quality of the triad. Label the chord by the root name and quality, such as G major, G minor, G diminished, G augmented. Chord inversions. Triads have a chord member other than the root. If triads that have a chord member other than the root as the lowest sounding voice, the bass, are called inversions. When you move the position of any of the chord members, an interval inverts. Any member of the chord may sound in the bass. Since there are 3 notes in the triad, there are 3 possible positions. We have root position, here. The root of the chord is in the bass. First inversion, here, which is the third of the chord is in the bass. And we have second inversion. The fifth of the chord is in the bass. When a chord is in root position, the intervals above the bass, the root, are a third and a fifth. When a chord is in first inversion, the intervals above the bass are a third and a sixth. When a chord is in second inversion, the bass is the fifth of the chord, and the intervals above them are a sixth and a fourth. Yes, the fourth above the bass in the second inversion triad is a dissonant interval and must be handled with care. If you go back to the interval exercise we did on Aurelia, another song, you will notice that 4, 6, and 11, which have P4 against the bass, are all second inversion chords. We will revisit this information again when discussing chord symbols and inversions, but for now, let's move on to the discussion of chords with 4 different tones, 7th chords. So, 7th chords. A 7th chord contains 4 notes, the root, the third, the fifth, and an added 7th. Because this arrangement of notes contains an interval of 7, which is a dissonant interval, all 7th chords are considered dissonant or unstable. Building and recognizing 7th chords. Given the types of triads combined with types of 7ths, there are 16 possibilities of 7th chords. Although other types are possible, 5 types of 7th chords are the most common used in common practice music and prevalent on the AP music theory exam. So, the 5 basic 7th chords. The major 7th, which is a major triad, major 7th. Or major 3rd, minor 3rd, major 3rd. The dominant 7th or major minor 7th, which is major triad, minor 7th. Or major 3rd, minor 3rd, minor 3rd. Minor 7th, which is a minor triad, a minor 7th, or minor 3rd, major 3rd, minor 3rd. Half diminished 7th, which is a diminished triad, minor 7th, or minor 3rd, major 3rd. Then we have a fully diminished 7th, which is a diminished triad and a diminished 7th, which is minor 3rd, minor 3rd, minor 3rd, if we would break down the chord entirely. With a 4-note chord, you must first stack the pitches in a snowman style to be able to identify the root of the chord. Then you must identify the quality of the triad and then the quality of the 7th. Sometimes it is difficult to rearrange the 4 chord members into a snowman. Try these helpful hints. Remember that the seventh inverts to a chord. So find the two notes that are a second apart. The root of the chord is the higher of the two notes. Another way to stack the snowman is by memorizing the combinations. As with triads, there are only 7 combinations of letter names. We can see them here. We have the triads, C, E, G, D, F, A, E, G, B, F, A, C, G, B, D, A, C, E, B, D, F. And we have them here with their 7th added. If you have spent time identifying intervals, then triads and 7th chords are just an extension of that information. 7 chords are also found in root position and inverted. Because there are 4 notes, there are 4 possible chord and chord positions. So we have the root position here. We have the first inversion with the 3rd in the bass, as we can see. We have the second inversion with the 5th in the bass, and we have the 7th in the bass, which is the 3rd inversion. Note, a second inverts to a 7th. So when you see 2 notes a second apart, the higher of the pitches is the root. Yes. So wherever you see this, you can always determine that this is the root of the chord. Okay. The intervals above the lowest sounding note, the bass, that are created when a 7th chord is inverted will be discussed in more detail in chapter 6. At this point, we want to simply recognize a 7th chord, identify the note that is the root of the chord, determine the quality of the triad and the 7th, and determine the inversion if appropriate. In order to apply this information, let's go back to the chorale on page 109 and identify the chord's quality and inversions within the first phrase. So that is something you can do on your own. Earlier in this version, you can do that. Anyways, let's review. So step one, identify the key. The key is D major. Let's begin. Oh, this is actually exactly what they just talked about. Never mind. Step 2, create a chord stack, as you can see here below, by putting the chord members in snowman style, and identifying the root of the chord by putting it on the bottom of the stack. Identify the notes that are doubled by putting them side by side in the stack. Circle the notes that are in the bass. This will tell you the inversion. If it's a 7th chord, just keep stacking. 3. What do we know now? Based on the chord stack in the circles, we know that the chord numbers 1, also 2 and 3, 5, 12, and 13 are in root position. All the triads in root position have the root of the chord doubled in this example. All the triads, I just read that. Chord numbers 4 and 11 are second inversion. In these two chords, the 5th of the chord has been doubled. Chord numbers 7, 12, and 9, 10 are 7th chords. 7 and 12 are the same chord, and 9 and 10 are the same chord. Of these 4 7 chords, only 1, 12, is in root position. Chord number 7 has the 7th of the chord as the lowest sounding note, while 9 and 10 are the first inversion of the 7th chords. Chord 8 is a first inversion triad. Chord numbers 1, 5, 6, 8, and 11, and 13 are D major chords, tonic in this key. It is the chord most often used. So step 4, determine the root, quality, and inversion of each triad or 7th chord. This is your chance to pause and to write down the root, quality, and inversion of each 7th chord. Okay, for your information, we will mention at this point that the chord symbols used for chords and inversions. Although it is not tested on the exam, many students are familiar with this way of labeling chords and often find it helpful when learning the concept of chords identification and inversion. In chord symbols, a root position G major triad is simply written G. The G major triad with an added minor 7th is written G7. The G minor triad is written G minor. The G major chord in first inversion is labeled G over B. And a G major chord in second inversion is labeled G/D, G over D. The pitch after the slash indicates the lowest sounding pitch for the chord. If there is no slash in the chord, it is in root position. Chord symbols are placed above the staff. I don't have a picture of what it would look like in our Aurelia example, unfortunately. Okay, let's go on to the answers of step 4. So we have 1, 2, 3, which is a D major triad in root position. We have a G, we have number 4, a G major triad in second inversion. 5, D major triad in root position. 6, D major triad in second inversion. 7, A major triad with minor 7th chord. The 7th of the chord is in the bass. Yes, that would be the third inversion. We have 8, D major triad in first inversion. 9 and 10, E minor triad with a minor 7th in first inversion. 11, D major triad in second inversion. 12, A major triad with minor 7th in root position, and D major triad in root position. For additional study, we see Abide With Me or any other rhythm in Appendix B, not included in this series, as well as the full chorale of Aurelia. Okay. Do an analysis of the chord by stacking it like a snowman with a root on the bottom. Label the chords with letter names and quality. Circle the note that is in the bass. Note that some chords are inverted. Okay, chapter summary. An interval is the distance between two notes. Intervals are melodic, sounding one after the other in a melody, or harmonic, two notes sounding at the same time. We described exact interval size by quantity, size, and quality. Diatonic intervals above the tonic and major scale are perfect first, major second, major third, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, major sixth, major seventh, and perfect eighth. When the quantity remains the same, an interval is one step smaller. When the quantity remains the same, an interval that is 1/2 step smaller than major is minor. When the quantity remains the same, an interval that is 1/2 step smaller than perfect or minor is diminished. And when quantity remains the same, an interval that is 1/2 step larger than major or perfect is augmented. And harmonic intervals sound the same but are spelled different. The only diatonic augmented or diminished interval is an augmented fourth or diminished fifth. The augmented fourth is called commonly a tritone. When a major or perfect interval is made one whole step larger without changing the letters, names, or the pitches, it is called doubly augmented. When a minor or perfect interval is made one whole step smaller without changing the letter names of the pitches, it is called a doubly diminished. Intervals are inverted by transferring the lower note of an octave or transferring the lower note an octave higher or transferring the higher notes an octave lower. Intervals are one octave or smaller are called simple intervals. Intervals that are larger than an octave are called compound intervals or compound. The most common are the 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th, which corresponds to an octave plus a second, third, fourth, and fifth. Consonant intervals are perfect first, perfect or unison, perfect fifth, perfect eighth or octave, major third, major sixth, minor sixth, and sometimes the perfect fourth, depending on the context. Dissonant intervals are major second, major seventh, minor seventh, sorry, all augmented and diminished intervals, and sometimes the perfect fourth, which is generally considered a dissonant when used harmonically above the bass. The motion of the dissonant interval to the consonant that acts as its goal is called resolution. A triad is a 3-note chord made up of 2 intervals stacked in thirds. The lower note is called the root, and the middle note is the third because it is an interval of the third above the root. And the upper note is called the fifth, a fifth above the root. We have the major third and a perfect fifth, major triad, minor third and perfect fifth, minor triad, major third and augmented fifth, augmented triad, and minor third and diminished fifth, diminished triad. If you know what the major chord is, then you can easily adjust the third and the fifth to create the other chord qualities. From major, raise the fifth of the chord to create an augmented chord. From major, lower the third to create a minor chord. And from major, lower the third and the fifth to create a diminished chord, or only the fifth from the minor chord. Triads that have a chord member other than the root as the lowest sounding voice, the bass, are called inversions. Root in position is when the root of the chord is in the bass. First inversion is when the third of the chord is in the bass. Second inversion is when the fifth of the chord is in the bass. We also have, in seventh chords, we also have the third inversion. A second chord contains 4 notes. What did I say? Second? No, a seventh chord contains 4 notes. The root, third, fifth, and seventh. Because this arrangement of tones contains an interval of 7th, which is a dissonant intervals, all 7th chords are dissonant or unstable. 5 basic 7th chords. We have the major 7th, which is a major triad plus a major 7th. We have the dominant 7th or major minor 7th, which is a major triad and a minor 7th. We have the minor 7th, which is a minor triad and a minor 7th. We have a half diminished 7th, which is a diminished triad and a minor 7th. We also have the fully diminished 7th, which is a diminished triad and a diminished 7th. And that is it of this part 5, Harmonic Organization 1, intervals, triads, and 7th chords. So thank you so much for watching. If you like what you see, I'd be honored if you subscribe. And if you have any questions, I'm guessing there are a lot, just post them in the comments and I'll get to them as soon as possible. Thank you for watching.